Okay, so good morning to everybody who's shown up so far. It's a little sparse on the ground this morning, probably because of some pretty crappy weather we're both dealing with here in Edmonton. So the pattern I'm doing today, I sent you, it's the precursor to the Humpy. This is a Humpy. And I think you'll see the difference is simply coloring the underbody. And I did this one in stages as well as what we were talking about for the fly swap. The starting is with a basically this, I'm trying these on size number 10 hooks, partly because I want you guys to be able to see what's going on, and also because I think these ones, they don't do too well when you get down to size 14s. I think you know 10s and 12s are probably the best for this particular pattern. So I do them in stages. So the first stage is to tie in the tail, and part of this fly is getting the length of deer hair right. So I tied in the tail for a couple of them, and then on top of the tail, you tie in the what's going to be the overbody and the wing. And the trick here is getting the lengths of the extra deer hair on the top. And then, well, before you tie this over the top to make the back and the wing, you need, if you're going to tie a Humpy, all you do is you add the floss underneath, and then you put the hackle on. So what I'm going to do today is I'll show you this one again with the hackle. And so there's the completed fly that's a red hackle. So that's the typical Humpy. So I've debarbed the hook. I got a size 10 Mustad 5262 and put it in the vise. And because I'm dealing with deer hair, as we were talking with Florin earlier, you don't want to use really fine thread because it tends to crimp or kink the deer hair. And also it tends to make the deer hair spin around the hook rather than sit on top of the hook. So I'm using 6/0, not 8/0 for this size fly. I'm going to start this rest behind the eye a bit. And I'm going to, in order to keep the deer hair from spinning around the hook, to help keep it sit on the top where I want it, I will go all the way down the hook shank to the point off the tag. And then I will keep going down to the bend, which is basically where the barb was. And then I will wrap forward up the hook, so I've got a good under base of thread. And I will stop at what we would normally on a dry fly call the wing position. Now I've got two grades of deer hair for this fly. I have this stuff here, which I got from Robinson. It's called X caddis, and it's really fine deer hair. You can't use it for the entire fly.
You can use the washroom beforehand. It's too right without waiting area assignments.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have a mask.
Oh yeah.
So so it's too short.
It's fake.
I walked on in and thank you very much.
Yeah. It's not a big deal if you're not sick. It's not like you're.
Well, no, I do have a cold.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, you've got the speaker on.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Bill, can you mute?
William,
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, I'll turn it off.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. So, and then for the rest of it, I've got just plain deer hair that I've had around for a while. Standard natural deer hair. And it's longer. It's a little more coarse. So for the tail, I'm going to use the X caddis hair, which is quite fine. And what I do with that is I try to keep the skin trimmed off the bottom so that I can lay it down on the bench here in front of me. And I'll slip my scissors underneath about the size of patch of deer hair that I want and trim it right off, right up against the skin. So you can see I just leave the little bits on the skin. I will grab it by the tip. And if you're tying with deer hair, one of the things you really have to have is a fine-tooth comb. And I will just go through this, and you can see I'm pulling the fuzz out with the comb. And the reason for doing that is that with the fuzz left in place, you put it in your hair stacker, it will not stack properly. The fibers cling to each other, and it won't stack. So I have my favorite hair stacker, and those in the Northern Lights, you guys will probably recognize this used to belong to Roman Cherubin. So every time I use it, I think of Roman, who is a member of and a good friend of ours in the Northern Lights. So I'm gonna just whack it on my leg here, whack it up and down a few times. And I'm doing it on my leg because otherwise it makes a hell of a racket. I just pull the tube out and you'll see that it's evened up all the ends on the deer hair. Now there's some that are sticking out the bottom. So I'm going to pull those out, which will thin it down a little bit. So there's what's going to be my tail. And to measure this, I want the tail to be longer than a normal tail on a fly. I want it to stick out the back of the fly about half of the shank length of the hook. So I'll measure it like that and take that back to the point where I'm going to tie it in, and then hold the front with my right hand, slide my fingers up and pinch it where the thread is hanging. Take my scissors and I will trim nice and snug to my fingers. Trim off all the butts. So I got that sitting there. Then I'll set this down on top of the hook and run a loose wrap over top of the deer hair and down the far side, over top, down the, one of the problems with this this spun thread is it has a tendency to flop the wrong way if you don't take the spin out of it. So because when you wrap around the hook shank with your bobbin, it tends to untwist the thread. So I just spin the bobbin a bit to get the thread to sit right. And then when it goes over, it goes straight over instead of flopping forward. And I'll bring it over and down the far side. And then to cinch it down, I'm going to pull up, not down. Pull up, pull up. What that does is that keeps the deer hair on top of the hook, and it keeps it from wrapping around the hook. Now, I will slide my fingers back on the deer hair a bit and hold it up at an angle. And using light wraps, not heavy ones, I will go down the hook shank all the way till I get to where my thread ends. When I get to the back of the fly, I'll swap hands here and hold that tail up, and I'll wrap down underneath it a couple of times, and then bring the thread in front. Let that hang. And you'll see what that does. That makes the tail stick up a little bit, because otherwise it has a tendency to wrap around the hook and hang down on the far side. Now I can cinch this down a little by wrapping forward to where I end again at the so-called wing position. And here again, to consolidate this to make sure it's not going to unwrap on me, I have this brushable super glue that you can get at Home Hardware. And I'm just going to get the brush damp a bit here, and I'm going to put a little on the top. And that'll cement that deer hair so that it ain't gonna wrap around the hook. Just make sure it's good. So now I got a reasonably length tail, and it's a decent size.
Excuse me, Dave. I
Yeah.
couldn't quite read the label on the super glue. What's that called?
This is called Home Bond,
Home Bond.
and
Okay.
and you get it at Home Hardware.
Okay. Thanks.
It's about $8, I think, for one of these little things.
Good.
And
Thanks.
it'll last for a while. You can buy other brushable super glues, but that one is fairly inexpensive. So now I'm going to use the longer deer hair to do the rest of the body, and it's going to be the pulled forward body. So I'm going to tie it on back, wrap over top of the body, and then pull it forward and wrap in front to hold the wing up. So I need to get a chunk of deer hair that's a little thicker than the body, enough to make a reasonable wing. That might be a little much. It'll thin out a bit when I do the stacking. So I'll pull that up, set this thing down on the bench again, get my scissors right down at the bottom and trim it off. Nice and neat and tidy. So you can see I've been doing that all along. And once again, I'll hold this by the tips, get my comb, hold it over my waste bucket, and take all of the short ends out and the fuzz. That takes a minute or two. When I get that all cleaned up, I'll put this in my other stacker. It's a little bigger and handles the bigger clump better. Let it sit down and then whack it on my knee a few times. Uh-oh, that went on the floor. Let's try that again. I let go of the wrong part of that stacker. Let's move that quickly here. Get a chunk of hair off the thing. By the end. See, I'm going to take the long, extra long one sticking out. Okay, let's try this again. Down in the stacker. So don't pull it up like this or you end up with deer hair on the floor like I just did. Just pull it out to the side and grab it by the tip. There's my stacked deer hair. And that should be a pretty decent wing. It might be a little fat, but that's okay. I need to measure the right length because what we're going to do is we're going to end up with a wing that I want to stick up that's about the length of the tail. And I need to get the length of the tail plus the length of the body. And so I measure with my right hand tail length and maybe a little more than tail length. And right to where the head thread is hanging, grab with the right, move the whole clump back to where I'm going to tie it at the back. Grab it with the left hand, and again, take it with my right hand where the thread is hanging, where I'm going to tie it in. Bring my left hand up. This is how you measure the length that you want. And at this point, I'm going to trim off nice and tight to my thumb and finger. And we'll do the same thing. I'm going to spin my bobbin to keep that thread twist right. Down on the hook and up over the top, down, and keep my finger on the far side of the hook, pushing up against the shank and pull up. And I'll do that a couple of times to get that nice and secure. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll hold that clump of deer hair up. And this I want to use relatively light wraps as I go back. And that will keep it from rolling around the hook. When I get back to exactly where I tied the tail in, then I'll come forward and I will use much heavier wraps, much more tight wraps to pull all that stuff down and compress the body a bit. And I would do that without trying to have this deer hair wrap around the hook shank. So now you see I've got some nice long deer hair there that sticks out past the tail. So it's easy for me to grab the ends and pull them forward to make the wing. Now for this, I'm going to try it just like a humpy. So I'll take my early humpies, use sort of yellow or fluorescent yellow floss. So I'm going to make the body of the humpy out of this stuff. Going to wrap the thread back all the way back to where I start the body, then come forward. And at this point, I'm going to throw a half hitch. Use my bobbin rest because it makes it a lot easier to wrap this body if I have my bobbin hanging out of the way. And then I'm going to rotate the vise to wrap a nice colored body. I don't want to wrap that. I want to be careful not to let the deer hair wrap around the hook. And this tape, you can see my deer hair has gone around. I managed to push my deer hair around under the hook. Oh well. Anyway, we'll get there. Okay, once I get my body where I want it, wrap over top, wrap the front, and I managed to get all my deer hair caught up in the hook, so I can use my bodkin to pull that out of there. There we go. That didn't happen very often when I was doing these earlier, so. And I grab all this body deer hair. That did not look good. Where's my tail? Okay. Where'd you go? There we are. There we are. I think I screwed up here somehow. I let the deer hair wrap around the hook again, even though I've tried so hard not to let that happen. And I might have got a little bit large a portion of deer hair for the body. So I've lost my tail. I'd stroke it, maybe I can get the tail to come. There we go. I stroke it a bit, I can get the tail to come out from underneath. There it is. It's wrapped a bit. Okay. I can see it there. Yeah, it just trapped the tail. It wrapped right around. Darn. This is called salvaging your fly or trying to. Oh, poop. Okay, there we go. It's coming. What I'm trying to do is get the short deer hair off the tail out from the mix of the longer stuff. This is why I tried so hard not to get and it worked fine until I went to put the floss on. Oh, well. I will show you the finishing steps. It might not look pretty. Come on. Tail, stick out there. I'm going to be working with my tweezers to get the mallards out. Okay, so now I've got it forward. Normally, if you didn't wrap your tail up with the back, you would just tie this down like that. And then you pull it straight up and wrap in front to make it stand up. And then this one, I'll also do a quick wrap around it like that to make it stand up like a post. Now what I'm going to do is I'll get my tweezers in here, and there's a bunch of this excess back deer hair I'm just going to pull out. Enough to try and leave a tail. There. Get the long ones out. This is how you manage when you screw up. Now we're getting there. Okay, now I've almost got a tail. Okay, there we go. So you can see I've got the body, the deer hair wrapped over the body with the tail sticking out the back still. Now I take my hackle, and it's simply a Grizzly hackle. And I've stretched it back like this so I can measure the length of hackle I want. And I'll pick, I've had several hackles here, and I'll pick the one that's got about the right length of hackle fibers to be a little shorter than the wing. I'll strip the stem back here a bit to create a bare spot on the stem. Turn that off. And I'll put this hackle on so that the colored side is facing away from me. And I'll put it right down, get my thread behind the wing, and I'll put it right down on the side of the wing facing tip down, get a couple of good wraps there, and get in front and wrap the end of that hackle down. And he's in there pretty solid. Hackle pliers. And I will do a few wraps of hackle behind the wing. I say 2 or 3 anyway behind the wing. And then I'll bring it forward and I'll make a couple of wraps in front of the wing. And then hold it up like that. 45 degrees, put my thread through a couple of times, and then pull it back and wrap a couple of times in front. Yeah. And just snip the thread on top. Pull the hackle back away from the eye and make a couple of good wraps right behind the eye. Hackle, get my whip finisher, and I'm with it. And this is a very fuzzy fly. But you want to tidy up a few things. So that's where my tweezers come in handy. I can pull off the hackle fibers that I want out of the way, like some of these guys down here. And any that stick out the back that I don't like. So that's in general. You will have to ignore the fact that even though I tried with the super glue to keep this stuff from wrapping around like crazy, it made one complete wrap before I caught it. Oh well, oh well. There you go. No, stop the spotlight. Okay. Well,
Thanks, Dave.
That was entertaining.
Oh, it's good. Thank you.
It's nice to see you screw up occasionally too, Dave.
Yeah, well, when I was practicing, I don't know if you can see, but the first, I had too much hair to start with for the wing. And you can see right here, the first wrap of hair, when I started doing the floss over top, it grabbed part of the hackle that was going to be the wing, and it wrapped it underneath and through the gap of the hook. And so that twisted the whole body and it bound up the tail.
Yeah.
So that goes back to this. The trick is to keep these separate and then make sure this stuff is out of the way when you wrap the body so it doesn't catch all of the tail. And then you just simply pull that over by the tails, like by the tips. Because it's a longer hackle, it's fairly straightforward. Just grab the tips, pull it forward and down, and it will hold them in place. You'll get the odd mallard that sticks out, but you can pick those off with your tweezers later. So once you get it like that, then you can tie it down. Oh well, oh well. I was successful in tying several of them. And I'll finish those other ones up later. But this one, again, I think part of the problem is I had too big a batch of deer hair for the wing. Okay, Florin, you're on.
Thank you, Dave. Allow me to share the screen then. So I was recently doing pheasant tails, and this was one of the first flies that I learned to tie and fish. Although it's not exactly very easy beginner's fly. It's got a whole bunch of parts, and as you go down in size, of course, everything becomes a little bit more complicated. Now, the reason I thought it'd be fun to do this is because I did two little variations here. The important one is the legs. So the when you try to do legs on a pheasant tail, the sort of recommended way is to use pheasant tail for the wing case, fold it over, and then use the remaining tips and fold them back to make the legs. However, that works very well if you do straight pheasant tails with no beads on them. But when you're doing beads and you fold forward the wing case, then you run into the bead and complications follow immediately. And so that the tips of those pheasant fibers you're using now to try to do the legs get in the way and never sit in the right place, and you have too many of them and you have to trim them down, split them in half, and so on and so forth. It just doesn't work very well for me with the bead on. If you don't have a bead, all of that works very fine and you get a beautiful fly. So I thought, okay, let's try to do this a little differently. And of course, the other challenge with a bead-headed fly is that you end up with that little bit of a a gap there. So I was thinking of ways of trying to use that gap between the bead and the rest of the fly to my advantage. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of demonstrating on a size 10, I'm going to go ahead and try to demonstrate and see if I can survive this. Demonstrate this on a size 14, which is probably the smallest size that I would be willing to put on legs. On the really smaller ones, I would just go with a simple. This would be a size 16 or 18 fly. So just basic stuff. Okay, so starting with the bead, here's again a very simple way of doing the bead on this fly. Press your finger on the bead, having the bead upside down, so it's with the narrow end up, and then you're not gonna poke yourself doing this. Trust me. Just put the hook through the bead and bang. Done. Very easy. Then I'm going to have to, because I've been playing with all these different size hooks here, I'm going to adjust the vise to the hook size. Okay. It's a little bit too tight. And this is a standard kind of wet fly nymph hook. It's a Mustad 3906. I think what happens here is I have two batches. Mustad changed their hook sizes and manufacturing several times, I think. And you don't know anymore what wire you're getting. These are the reasonably heavy wire hooks, as you can see. Okay, for thread, I'm using dark brown 8/0 uni thread. As this is a fairly small hook and I don't want too much extra bulk from the thread. And periodically, I like to spin my thread to take the twist out of it, because otherwise what happens, especially with these Norvise bobbins, I get a little bit of, I don't know if you can see it here, I get a bit of wax buildup at the base of the tube. And that can, especially for some reason when the thread is a little twisted, that can fray the thread a little bit. Okay, so for the tail, well, this is a pheasant tail, so obviously I'm going to be using pheasant tail fibers. So I get just a little clump of fibers. Get it off the tail feather, and try to measure 2/3 of the hook length of the shank length here. I'm probably a little long, but I can always adjust that. So what I'm going to do is put a loop of thread over the pheasant. Make sure, whoops, okay. Like I said, let's see if I survive this. Let's try again. Sometimes 2 loops may be a better idea. I don't want this to be too tight, so I can still wiggle. As you can see, that the tail here would be way too long. All right, so no problem. Just going to pull up a little bit. Control this, hold it with my left hand and pull with my right hand until the point where I'm satisfied with the length of the tail. So let's say this would be a good length. And then just do a couple more wraps here to secure that. And then I'm going to get some fine wire. And this is some very fine wire that was salvaged years ago from some junk electronics. So before you throw away any electronics, you know, take a look inside, see if there's any little transformer there that's got some nice wire on it, because it's very, very good fly tying wire. And you don't have to pay the extortionist prices on official fly tying wire. And then just the remaining bit of wire, you just wrap the thread over it towards the head. Okay, so stop behind the bead, twist the thread a little bit, and then grab. You can do this by hand, or if you prefer not to, you can put a little bit of twist here in the fibers and get some kind of hackle pliers. This is a very nice model that I've been using a bit. I'll show it to you, but it's out of the picture for now, but you'll see it in a moment. So here, keep wrapping. As you can see, I'm using my rotary vise, but I didn't bother to use any knots or hang the thread in any other way. Just let it hang at the front. If you use fine thread and if you give it a little bit of length there, you can just do the wrapping of some materials very easily this way. So this is a nice little hackle plier, very simple. It's basically just a bent wire. And it grabs and holds very well and doesn't cut things off. So it's nice and smooth, and it's around $10 a piece. So it's not a bad piece of equipment. Okay, then ribbing. Just rib it again. I don't have to go all the way because this is where the thorax is going to be. So I always like to secure things twice. 2 wraps over the wire and 2 wraps in front. And that usually locks things in very nicely. The next ingredient is going to be a little bit of this antistatic bag plastic strip that's been pre-cut. Okay. So here, what I want to do is I want maybe to trim a little bit the tie-in end. Just give it a little bit of taper like this. And then put it here on top and secure. And then make sure that, you know, turn the vise around if you need to. Make sure that your plastic is sitting nicely right on top of the shank. And then with the bead, also make sure that the bead is not pushed up by thread and other materials to one side. So just grab it with your fingertips or just push with a fingernail to loosen up the bead. That'll help you fill in the space around the bead evenly rather than ending up with a, you know, one-sided thing. Now this plastic stuff curls up and has a tendency to get in your way. So what I do then is I take my other hackle pliers, these are standard Griffin hackle pliers, and grab the end of the plastic strip so I can now hang it over on the side of my vise. So now I have free reign to do stuff here. Now I'm going to do the thorax. And that's just plain peacock herl. I'm using some finer strands of peacock. Again, I don't want to build too much bulk here. Just a few turns. As you can see, I'm tying this on top of everything else that went before. So everything kind of builds additional bulk, each new material that I add on. So I only need one layer of peacock. I don't need to go and do much more than trim. Now release the plastic and fold over the peacock. Pull nice and tight. Couple of turns, secure it, and then a few more turns in front. This is going to slide between the thorax and the bead. You don't see it, but there is still a gap there where the thread is going to slide into. Okay, so pay attention to that and then trim this nice and close. Okay, now we're ready. So you can see we have a nice shiny wing case. It's well secured. If you are nervous about that, you can always add a little bit of head cement on top. And now to finish the fly off, I'm going to turn, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the fly sideways in the vise so I can see a little better what I'm doing. And if you tie multiple of these, you may want to pull ahead of time some pheasant fibers so you don't have too many of them. But the challenge for me is to pull no more than, ideally you don't have more than 4 legs to the side. Okay, 5, 6 starts to, especially on a small size like this, it starts being bulky. Okay, so here I have 1, 2, 3, I believe this is 4. This is 3. This would be a little too few. This is, I think, 3. This should have been 4. So let me pull this clump here and see what do I have here. Oh yeah, this is a nice clump of 4 fibers. So let's try these. So get these between your fingers. One of them seems to be a little out of alignment for some reason. Can try to bring it back in line with the other ones. Okay, so now I have my 4 fibers. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to worry too much about length. I'm just going to try to worry only about placing these things on the side of the fly. Okay. So here, because this is an automatic bobbin, I have to hold everything in my hand, relieve the tension, and just do a soft loop and let the bobbin hang. Just use that weight. Okay, you can see I've got my fibers. They're only held by the weight of the bobbin right now. And a little bit of thread on top. So now I'm hoping I didn't fill up that space too much. May want to pull it a little bit more on the thread to get a little bit more tension.
I don't understand, sorry.
Nobody see?
And
Nobody see?
Are you for our MRI?
Yes.
Yeah, just sit here and they'll come up for you.
so,
Or knock on that door.
okay, Bill, could you please mute maybe so we don't
Oh,
record
sorry.
everything else? Sorry.
Yes.
All right, so here, just move the fly around in a position where you can see what you're doing and keep maneuvering. Take your time. Keep maneuvering until, let's say, you're happy with what you see. So the smaller the fly, that's why I said below size 14, I wouldn't want to bother with this. I don't even think it matters all that much. Okay, so then when you're satisfied, give the thread a little bit of tightening and do another turn or 2 of thread on the fibers and then another couple of turns in front. And that should lock everything in beautifully and standing up at a little bit of an angle. So what you're doing effectively at this stage is you're pushing those fibers against the thorax, and that flares them up and everything, while keeping them on the side there. Now I'm going to take the other side. So I'm going to get another clump of pheasant fibers. And this time I have, you know, if you're a perfectionist, you know, here I had 5, so I separate one and pull it off. It's easier to do this in your hand, it seems, than to count 4 fibers off the pheasant tail directly. I find that to be a little difficult. And those of you who are better fly tyers, I'm sure can do that. Okay, so again, soft loop here to hang this on the fly. Again, way too long, right? And then pull, 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 gently, gently, gently should do the trick. Still too long. Keep pulling. Getting there. Pull a little bit more. Now you may want to turn it. You're not going to see very well from the angle of the camera, but from my angle now I can see both sides head on, and I can adjust the length to exactly the desired symmetric, right? So what I want to achieve here is both sides as close as possible to each other. So this looks good to me, and I'm going to now, whoops. Need to turn it back so I see what I'm doing. So tighten and then do one more wrap on top of the pheasant fibers to secure them, and then in front. Ah, and there is the boo-boo. All right. Dave, you're in good company. I am not getting my things working either. Okay, so now when this happens to you, just, you know, get another bunch of fibers, but also make sure that you unwrap a couple of turns of thread so you don't end up building too much bulk here, because that's going to work against you in a big way. Okay, so here again. Good place. That's the position I want it in. And then I'm just going to pull on my fibers to bring them in line with the other ones lengthwise. Okay, it's still a bit long. Just a little bit more. This is not working for you, it's just not working, and then you just have to keep on pulling a few separate clumps. Wow. Okay, so now I secured it, I think. Turns, and you can see now I've got my legs on either side. And then it's time to finish the fly off. 2, 3. I usually like to do 2 whip finishes So I can do away with using glue. 1, 2, 3, 4 turns. Tighten. And the other thing is when you finish your whip finish, if you don't want to end up with an unsightly thread stub here, just tension the thread a little bit and cut. This should take care of things. Still got some fuzz, eh? Oh well. It's only visible on camera and to the trout, so don't worry about it. And that's the complicated way to tie a pheasant tail. If you want to put legs on, if you think that size 14 is too small to put legs on, then don't only do this on, you know, sizes 12 and 10. For a size 10, definitely this works quite. This does work quite well. And, this is what.
Very nice, Florin.
This is what it looks like. Okay. And I think this can give you nice legs. You know, if you want to use a flashback pheasant tail like this one for, let's say, fishing water boatmen or something, because you got the flash in there and you got the legs here on the side. You just do longer legs and you do size 10s and 12s, and that should serve you well. So that's it. It took a little bit of doing, but it's there, and you can practice this. You can try to improve on this method. But I find that for bead heads, this is the better way to do it. Although it may feel like it takes a little longer, it at least gets you there.
Nice fly. I like it.
Yeah. So
I'll take a dozen.
you take a dozen.
Yeah,
Which size would you like, sir?
16s.
16s. Just be warned, the 16s don't have legs. And I'll do home delivery, Dick.
Yeah, I know. No,
A dozen in size 16 without legs, and I'll bring the amp along.
oh, geez.
So stop the highlight there, Florin.
I'll cancel my order.
Who canceled the order? Okay.
Yeah. Just turn your highlight off for a sec, Florin.
Here you go. There you go.
Okay. So, this has got to be the How to Salvage a Fly edition.
Yeah, it definitely was. But basically, you know, if you go slowly, no panic, you know, stuff happens. Get a new clump of material, unwind a few turns of thread.
So
And
you'll probably see.
Stop recording, actually.
Well, I will in a sec. You probably see that I finished off one of the ones that I showed you earlier that was partially prepared, and that tells you the advantage of having done it in stages and leave bits in prepared, because this is one that I had the wing not on yet, so I redid the wing, or the back and the wing, and very quickly put the thread on and finished. So that's what it's supposed to look like at the end of the day. And that does show the advantage sometimes of doing these in batches rather than doing them one at a time. So let me just stop the video. Stop
I
video.
would venture to say, Dave, that if you fished the one that didn't quite turn out and this one that you did, I'm sure they would both work equally well.
Yeah, it's